Good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Isabel Molina, and I am the Public Programs Producer here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. I am very pleased to welcome you to today's program, Collection Showcase Reclaiming Jewish Identity During the Holocaust. Here at the museum, we are dedicated to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you all for joining us today virtually. We hope, if you're able, that you will visit the museum in person to see our current exhibitions, including Courage to Act, Rescue in Denmark, the museum's first exhibition for visitors ages 9 and up. You can learn more and buy tickets on our website, and there are a bunch of helpful links about the museum posted in the chat. Closed captions are available on today's program, and again, instructions on how to turn captions on or off are posted in the chat. If you have questions for our speakers during the program, please put them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Again, that's the Zoom Q&A box and not the chat. Today, we are honored to be joined by Esme Kamlet and Professor Judy Tydor Baumel-Schwartz. Esme Kamlet, our outgoing Chaskel Tydor Curatorial Intern, is a native New Yorker and a rising senior at Brandeis University, where she studies Near Eastern and Judaic studies, focusing on the Bible and the ancient world. Esme aspires to be a museum professional. Professor Judy Tydor Baumel-Schwartz is a director of the Arnold and Leona Finkler Institute of Holocaust Research, the Abraham and Edita Spiegel Family Professor in Holocaust Research, the Rabbi Pinchas Brenner Professor in Holocaust Research and Research on the Holocaust of European Jewry, and the Professor of Modern Jewish History in the Israel and Golda Kashitsky Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry at Bar Ilan University in Israel. She is a consulting historian and curator of the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. Thank you all for joining us. And now I'm going to hand things over to Trevor Walsh, the associate curator here at the museum.
Thank you so much, Isabel. And it's my pleasure to be giving an introduction to the Chaskel Tydor Curatorial Internship. The Chaskel Tydor Curatorial Internship is awarded to one student twice annually who is engaged in scholarship in Holocaust studies, Jewish history, European history, museum studies, or a related field. Our interns work closely with the entire collections and exhibitions department. They meet with object donors to welcome new objects into the collection, and they host public programs like this one as part of the museum's adult education initiatives, providing insight into the museum's curatorial and scholarly work. And they also receive mentorship from our consulting historian and curator, Professor Judy Tydor Baumel-Schwartz. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Esme for today's presentation.
Hello, everybody. I'm Esme, and I want to thank you for being here. Give me one sec to share my screen, and we can get started. Okay. This presentation is called Reclaiming Jewish Identity During the Holocaust. It is a collection showcase, and it's done by me, the Chaskel Tydor Intern. So to introduce this topic, I would like to delve into two Hebrew words that are used to describe the Jewish people and different aspects of what it means to be Jewish and to have the Jewish identity. So the first word is Yehudim, and the second word or phrase is Am Yisrael. And they're translated a bit differently, and they mean slightly different things. So most of the time when you hear the word in modern day Hebrew for Yehudim, it's mostly talking to Jews, and it's more about the religious practices and beliefs of people. Well, Am Yisrael literally translates to the nation of Israel and is more talking about the people group with this identity. So delving into Jewish identity a little bit more, we can see that there's an aspect of Jewish identity that is religious. We can see from the word Yehudim. There's an aspect that is national from the nationhood. And when we look at the word Yehudim, it comes from the word Judean. And in the Bible itself, in the Tanakh, it is actually used as word meaning Judeans, people from Judah or people from the kingdom of Judah. So that also kind of hints more to a national identity. And then the word Am Yisrael, the Yisrael part is actually it's a second name given to the forefather Jacob. And it kind of talks to this more ethnic part of Jewish identity, of starting off as a tribe, as a family, passed down a religious and cultural practices passed down through a family group, and that everyone is related. And when you have a nation group who also became its own nation state with political autonomy, as we see in the Bible during from like around the 10th century BCE to around let's just say the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. That comes with all this kind of culture, and all this types that come together comes with a cultural identity, like different types of food, like latkes that we eat. And so to go through this presentation, I'm going to be showing different aspects of Jewish identity and how Jews and victims of the Holocaust emphasize these aspects of their Judaism as a way to counteract and dispute the Nazis' claims about Judaism. And so we're going to start off with ethnicity, then we're going to go into culture, national identity, and religious identity. I'm also first going to be showing a few images and other artifacts of the collection to preface and frame these highlighted pieces and get a little bit more into the history. Okay, let's get started. Oh, so what is resistance? This is going to be like a recurring theme and not necessarily a question I have an answer to. I think it's up to every individual person, but it is a thread that ties all these objects together that I've highlighted of how they're used as a way to survive and as a way of resistance and a way of proclaiming their identity and reclaiming their identity as their own. So let's start with talking about ethnicity and race. So in the early 20th century, race was understood in a very different context, and racism was done in a very different way than it is today. So there's something called eugenics, which is taking kind of the science of evolution and making it and distorting it to fit racist ideologies. And it kind of was a way of thinking, and this was prevalent everywhere. In the 20th century, it wasn't just a phenomenon for Jews, it wasn't just a phenomenon in Germany, but it was the idea that certain races and certain groups of people are less evolved than primarily white Anglo-Saxon people. And so here we have an illustration sheet published in 1939 from Germany that talks about the consequences of genetics and like intermarriage. And so here on the left, we see good, fair-skinned German children, and on the right, we see the less desirable Jewish children. So this is a type of framework of Jews being a less evolved race that we are working with right now. So let's look at this newspaper. This is a newspaper from 1936, which celebrates kind of um, Saarland's population's vote to return to German rule, and has very anti-Semitic cartoonage over here. And Jews are seen as race defilers and traitors, and anyone who sides with the Jews or even intermarries with a Jewish person is seen as a race defiler. But let's zoom in on the cartoon itself. Sorry. Here we go. As you can kind of see from the cartoon, we see a very racialized depiction and of a Jew. And what is kind of highlighted is not his religious beliefs, his cultural actions, or his identity, but actually his racial and ethnic features, like the big nose, the big lips, the hunching over the hands. And this is juxtaposed to a hardworking, blonde, stereotypically attractive German man. And the cartoon headline actually reads, Nibbish, no goy can think as meanly as our tribe when it comes to business. And I like to highlight the word tribe here, which is a group of people that kind of share the same family and ethnic and racial identity. And we can really see that that was kind of at the center of Nazism and Nazi anti-Semitism. With all this in mind, I like to talk about this drawing done. It's a black and white pen ink drawing of 3 heads, done by Kurt Carven in Vienna. During the Holocaust, he was partisan in many different areas of Europe, and he did these drawings of Nazis from 1948 to 1950 in Paris and or New York, kind of to work through his trauma. But here we see that he was drawing a Nazi soldier, and he is drawing them as Neanderthals or as a less evolved species of man. And this way, he is kind of taking the anti-Semitism of the idea that Jews are less evolved and being like, no, actually, with your cruelty and the way that you're treating human beings and your ideologies, you're the ones that are less evolved than we are, than Jews. And I think this is a really interesting way of reclaiming identity and taking it insult and turning it back onto somebody, onto the person that's insulting you, in a way of resistance, in a way of counteracting these ideas and the anti-Semitism that the Nazis were propagating during this time period. Moving on, we're going to talk about cultural aspects. So this is actually a picture that I took when I was in the British Museum a few years back, and it is from the Chish reliefs. So a little bit of context. In the year 701 BCE, Assyria came and attacked the kingdom of Judah, and they kind of really destroyed the city of Lachish. And Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, made this beautiful, well, historically beautiful relief kind of depicting this victory. And what is so super duper fascinating is that this is the first real depiction of Jews that we have in history, the earliest one we have. And I've highlighted this particular part because these are actually women. We know that they're women because they don't have beards. And these are women and children being taken away as most likely slaves. And what is important, I think, for what we're talking about is if you look, these women and these children have their heads and their hair covered, and the men do not have this. And the use of head coverings for both men and women has a long tradition in the Near East, with many people putting it as being from like the third millennium BCE, which is very, very old. And so women in this area were like tended to cover their hair and their heads with veils or headscarves. Originally was used as a way to protect um, their face and the eyes from sun, from cold, from wind and sand. But it slowly but surely evolved into something, a cultural dress that um, is from people in that group. If we see nowadays that Arab and Islamic women tend to have their hair covered, and people from that region, Bedouins and people who aren't Islamic, tend to cover their hair. And it's just a part of being from that place and having that culture. This is actually still prevalent in Judaism to have women covering their hair. Nowadays, in specific Jewish communities, is still tradition for women once they get married to start covering their hair. Um, this has been done for centuries, and it is a part of Jewish tradition, Jewish culture, and Jewish identity, especially for women. And so this is a picture of Pinchas and Naomi Kahn from 1940 that kind of depicts what Jews were typically wearing in the shtetls or small towns in Eastern Europe, small Jewish towns. And you can see the women were typically covering their hair with a cloth. In Hebrew and Yiddish, it's called a tichel. And that was the way that women typically cover their hair. And this is going to go into during the Holocaust, many women and female prisoners, their hair was shaved off, and to protect from lice and also to conserve heat, many women covered their hair, not for religious reasons, but is interesting kind of seeing this this cultural sign and dress being used in a different way. And this is a drawing done by an Italian soldier during the war of what he saw as being somebody who oversaw the trains. And he uses the blue to highlight people. And the woman in the foreground, that is kind of the highlight of this picture and the most focused, she is wearing a headscarf in a very traditional fashion that is highlighted in blue. And so this non-Jewish soldier kind of noted how the women dressed and how in concentration camps tended to how it was tended to be noted by having this head covering. And that is super fascinating. So the object I really want to highlight as a form of resistance is that there was a lovely woman named Rebecca who wanted to save some objects from her home, some familial objects, some religious objects that she found very special. And so what she did is that she took her challah cover. For those who are unfamiliar, is traditional that during a Friday night dinner for this for Shabbos or for the Sabbath, to have the bread covered while you make the blessing on the wine. And many people decorate these challah covers. And this one is decorated with some kind of typical Sabbath or Shabbos imagery and prayers. And clearly, this was very special to Rebecca. And when she was deported, she took this and saved it. And with great risk of herself and her own well-being, she used it as a head covering, intentionally or not, to cover her hair in the religious way. It is so kind of beautiful that the way that Rebecca chose to maintain her religious heritage and identity, she chose um, to use it as a way of covering her hair, which also has its own link to Jewish traditions. And we have this artifact because she passed it down. She used it as a challah cover when she moved to Borough Park, and that is how we actually have the object today. So it's very fascinating. Next, I'd like to talk about kind of the more national aspect of Jewish identity. So this is kind of important. I'm actually going to be highlighting the Star of David, the Jewish star, or in Hebrew, the Magen David. Um, Contrary to to popular belief, the Star of David is not particularly religious. It was not a uniquely religious symbol for a very long time. Uniquely Jewish symbol. It was found in mosques. It was found in churches, and it's also found in the Hindu religion for being just this beautiful geometric shape. But because it has ties to David, King David, um, it was important to all three Abrahamic religions. However, then in the 1300s, the Jews of the ghetto Prague, very different type of ghetto. Just as a side note, than the Holocaust ghettos, they're just a small town that Jews were kind of forced to live in, outside of like the main towns. But the Jews of Prague were allowed to make a flag to represent themselves and their group and their people. And they chose this symbol that kind of become an amulet and mystic symbol of protection. And that kind of idea of this Star of David becoming a symbol to represent Jewish people spread among Europeans and then became was taken upon by Zionists in the first Zionist convention to be their symbol. So over here, this ring is a Zionist ring. In Hebrew, it says Sion, which is Zion in Hebrew, and it has the Magen David, the Jewish star. And they purposely chose this symbol because it was not particularly religious and it was not going to offend any, and it already represented the group Jews as a whole, and it wasn't going to and every single sect of Judaism felt comfortable being represented by this symbol, and it wasn't particularly niche. It was a very broad symbol used to represent the group Jews, not any ideological stance that they had. And you can see the Star of David on the flag of Israel today, kind of showing that this national group of people identity has kind of been tied to this Star of David, even if it is used in many ways in a religious symbol and is kind of juxtaposed to the cross for Christianity. Next, we can't talk about the Star of David without talking about how they were used in the Holocaust. So, for those who are unfamiliar, Nazis and Jews in places that were occupied by Nazis were forced to use identifying markers, mostly a yellow Star of David with the word Jude or Jew in their native language to identify themselves, and as a form of humiliation. What is really interesting is, contrary to popular belief, the Nazis were the first ones to use the Star of David as this distinguishing symbol. Having Jews define themselves as Jewish and wearing identifiable marker is pretty old and dates back to like the early Middle Ages, actually in Islamic territories, and was then got then caught on by the church. Um, but it was normally like a symbol of like a circle or some other geometric shape. It wasn't necessarily um, this type of symbol that represented the Jews chose to represent themselves. And so Nazis purposefully chose a symbol that Jews used as a symbol for themselves and their group as a way to humiliate them and also be the symbol, I think, of their torture and um, discrimination. So to highlight this, this might be my favorite object of this presentation. A woman named Margaret, sorry, was an inmate in Auschwitz, and she took the sole of her shoes and the string falling off of her clothes and made this Jewish star necklace. And if she was caught wearing this, she could have been severely punished and possibly even lose her life. But she decided to risk it all and also take the very limited resources that she had and make this jewelry and beautify this symbol. And when I was first looking at this object, I was kind of confused because when I think of the Holocaust, I think of the yellow Star of David. And to me, that is like the symbol of the Holocaust. And I would think, as a victim of the Holocaust, she would feel similarly and not really want to associate with that symbol. But not only was she kind of saying that I am not going to be defined by this symbol, she was saying, I'm going to take back this symbol. I'm going to beautify it. I'm going to wear it. And I'm going to be proud of my heritage. And I'm going to reject the notion that a Jewish star and wearing a Star of David is humiliating and a sign of oppression. For me, is a sign of my salvation. And I think that is just a beautiful way of resisting and staying alive. And is quite meaningful. Finally, I would like to talk about more of a religious aspect. So in Judaism, we kind of have this underlying theme of stones being witnesses. And to touch upon this point, I chose a particular Bible quote that I think really speaks to this. Genesis 31:48. In Hebrew, it says, Vayomer Lavan Hagaal Hazeh Eid Beinei Uveinecha Hayom Al Ken Kra Shemo Gilad. And Lavan said, and declared, this mount of stones is a witness between you and me this day. And this is why this place is named Gilad. What is actually really interesting about the story is there were people surrounding Lavan, and he was making a covenant with Jacob at the time. And Jacob's children, his many children, all 12 or 13, if you of his children and their children, there's a bunch of people that could have been witnesses to this exchange, but they decided to make a mount and a stone a physical representation of using stones as a way to symbolize this agreement. And I was also just kind of be a witness to the agreement that they came upon, their covenant. And this is seen in many ways throughout the Bible. We see it in secular life with monuments mostly being like statues and made out of stone is kind of used as a memorial. So stones also outside of the Bible stand as witnesses to important times and aspects of Jewish life. Like an engagement ring has precious stones in it. This is an engagement ring from a couple in Germany in 1938. They actually smuggled it out in a box of chocolate. There is kind of two aspects to this one. The tombstone, which is in itself in the name, made out of stone, but also Jews have a tradition of taking stones and putting them on graves for various different reasons. But the one that I personally resonate the most with, as it is kind of like flowers, but it lasts longer, and it's there to show somebody visited, somebody cared, um, and remembers this person and was a witness to their life and to their accomplishments. And kind of more broadly, the Jewish people, we have the Western Wall, the Kotel, as it was called in the early 20th century, the Wailing Place, the Wailing Wall, and it's these bricks of stone that have stood for centuries, that kind of witnessed all of Jewish exile and Jewish history, and is a testament to what once stood there in Jerusalem, uh, and the Jewish temple and the Jewish destruction of the Jewish temple and the suffering that happened during the destruction, happened since, and also the good times that will come, for many Jews believe, the times of the Messiah and the Mashiach, the temple will be rebuilt. Also, there is a tradition of leaving a little note with your prayers and putting it inside the stones uh, um, of the Kotel, of the Western Wall. And that also kind of like the wall has been kind of a silent witness and representation of many Jews' pasts and hopes and beliefs and prayers. So this is actually my coworker Grace's favorite object in our collection. So a little shout out to her for really highlighting this on my first day here. But there was context for this is that Kristallnacht, widely agreed upon to be the start of the Holocaust. It was kind of this organized pogrom or attack on Jewish businesses and Jewish and synagogues and Jewish places of worship. At the time, it was framed as a bunch of people coming together, not like a riot, but it was really an organized attack by the German government to, on Jewish-owned businesses and synagogues. And stones were used to break the glass and were thrown. And Kristallnacht actually is referred to as the Night of Broken Glass because all the Jewish storefronts were broken. But also a bunch of synagogues were burned to the ground. And so this young boy wanted to save the stones from his synagogues that he went to growing up. So Norbert, a few days after Kristallnacht happened, went on his bike and he picked up some of the remnants of his synagogue and he put it inside a film can, intentionally or not. This has a wonderful metaphor of kind of being witness and being a memorial. Film and cameras and pictures capture the most important parts of our lives in a way that you can't dispute what happened. It is not only a witness, but a memorial. And by keeping these stones of his old synagogue in this film case, he's not only um, taking their memory and saying, I remember and I witnessed the joys that happened in the synagogue and what happened before Kristallnacht and all the weddings and bar mitzvahs and births that were celebrated here. But these stones are also a memorial to the first people that are rounded up and during Kristallnacht and to all the kind of life that was lost with the Holocaust. To sum up, in summation, I would like to go through kind of reiterate the different aspects of Jewish culture that I decided to highlight. We have ethnicity, we have culture, we have national identity, we have religious identity, and we probably have a lot more. And I want to also point out that many Jews also have different levels of all these different um, identities, and it's not as clear cut as it seems. For example, when we're looking at the challah cover and the cultural, that has religious ties because it's a religious artifact. And national, of course, has religious and ethnic ties. I was actually debating when making this presentation on whether or not I should even separate ethnic and national because there's just so concepts are so tied together, especially in the Jewish tradition. But ultimately, I wanted to highlight kind of the uniqueness of those both different aspects of Jewish identity. I also wanted to end like posing this question of what is your identity and how is it a form of resistance? And I think every single identity out there, whether it's Jewish identity, whether it's your cultural identity, whether it's your identity as a student, or as what you do as your job, your family role, it is a form of resistance against stereotype and hate broadly in the world. Personally, I chose to do this presentation because I feel, as a Jewish person, that America kind of puts Judaism in the box of religion and it kind of sees it only through the lens of a religion and a religious identity, which to me does not feel full and it doesn't kind of reflect all of which I see in my religion. Personally, I am not, I personally I know a lot of Jews who consider themselves atheists, but they're would be religious, as you would say, and they deeply connect with their Jewish identity, just not maybe the God aspect. And if you think of Judaism as solely a religious entity, you're missing out on so many different aspects of Judaism. There's also, I know some people who want on censuses and when filling out what race you are, they want to put down Ashkenazi Jewish. And that is actually, excuse me, that is already like an option on ancestry.com, which is fascinating. But it is not really kind of recognized in the broader society. And so all this is to say that in a way, this presentation is my form of resistance and reclaiming of Jewish identity against the kind of notion that Judaism is solely a religion. Thank you. I'll also thank you for coming. I'd like to give special thanks to Sarah Softness, Grace Rosenberg, Professor Judy Baumel-Schwartz, Trevor Walsh, Shannon Gilbert, Isabel, Nyla and David Kamlet, my former professors and teachers, and everybody here at the Jewish Heritage Museum. Thank you.
Okay, then we are moving over to me. And Esme, I want to thank you for a fascinating and very, very meaningful, thoughtful presentation. I'd like to spend the next minute or two talking about what the Chaskel Tydor Curatorial Internship is all about. And this is what you've been doing for the past couple of weeks, months, and then something specific about your presentation. My father, my late father, Chaskel Tydor, was a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Poland. He moved to Germany. He became a refugee, actually, with his family in Germany during World War I. So many Polish Jews ran to other parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, some to Vienna, some to Munich, some to Frankfurt. Anyway, his family did not go back to Poland, as 19,000 other Jews from Poland did not go back to Poland at the end of World War I, but they remained in Germany. My father grew up in Germany, went to school there, married, had 2 children, and then Hitler came to power. He tried to get out of the country, and by the time visas came for him and for my brother and sister's mother to leave the country, World War II had broken out. My brother and sister were sent out of Germany in 1939, before the war began, as very small children with what was known as a Kindertransport, a children's transport to Belgium. And meanwhile, our father, who had been actually deported to Poland along with a bunch of Polish Jews in late 1938, before Kristallnacht, he got permission to come back to Germany to pick up his visa to England, which, as I said, arrived after the war began and he could not use it. He was picked up by the Gestapo the first week of the war, was taken to Buchenwald, spent 2.5 years in Buchenwald. From there, he was deported to Auschwitz, where he was until January 1945. In January 1945, he and the other Jews of Auschwitz, or the other inmates in general of Auschwitz, were sent on the death march. And he ended up back in Buchenwald, where he was liberated on April 11th, 1945. So he actually spent the entire war, the entire Holocaust, as we call it, in Nazi camps. I remember as a young girl, when I knew about the Holocaust from home, but when I learned about it in school and I had questions about a ghetto, and I remember asking him and saying, Daddy, what can, and he said, I can't tell you anything about a ghetto. I was never in a ghetto. I was only in a camp. I can tell you about camps. He was a very modest man. He never spoke about his own experiences except to tell me about very specific things. Now, remember, I'm a Holocaust historian and I interviewed him, but if I had a specific question, he'd give me a specific answer. Only after his death in 1993 did I begin to learn from his friends what incredible things, how many people he saved. He was a block secretary, but in practice, he was a work dispatcher, and how he risked his life really on a daily basis to transfer people from one group to another, to make sure that sick people would be listed actually by the names of people who were dead. They would be sent out to work, the dead on the list, so that the sick people could rest in the barracks and regain strength for a day or two until they would have to go out to forced labor. If he would have been caught, he would have been killed immediately, no question about it. And yet, over and over and over again, he risked his life to save people. He was very, I could only call it, into education of young people. And he was already in the parlance of concentration camps. He was an old man by the time he got there. He was already in his late 30s. And the fact that he managed to survive so many years between 1939 and 1945 in concentration camps and death camps is very, very unique. And he gathered around him, already in Buchenwald, a group of young boys from age 16 and up who had no family members, and he watched over them, and he turned them into a group that would take care of each other, mutual assistance. And he, together with other inmates, made sure that when the Nazis were looking for young men who would act as locksmiths and they would give them professional training, he made sure that these boys would get it, because he knew that having a profession in the camp might be saving their lives. That if you were just a laborer, you would be taken out. But if you were something that the Nazis needed, you had more of a chance. And when he came back to Buchenwald, remember, he was out from October 1942 until beginning of February 1945. Most of that group was still alive because the Nazis needed them. And he came back to Buchenwald and he was greeted by his boys. Just one story about him. Before we moved to Israel, we lived in Israel for the past 50 years. But when I was a young girl and we were on a trip from the United States to Israel, and we were walking down Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, I must have been maybe 8 or 9 years old. And all of a sudden, from the sky, it's like somebody jumps down in front of us and screams, it's Tydor, it's Tydor. And somebody from another balcony also jumps down, like an entire floor, from first floor to ground floor. And they start hugging my father, and I'm standing there in absolute shock. And my mother turns to me, she said, oh, don't worry, these are probably your father's boys from the camp. Father's boys from the camp. Okay, and that's like the first hint about, those were 2 of his locksmith boys from Buchenwald that he had saved by getting them into the group that the Nazis would teach them to be locksmiths, etc. Anyhow, at a certain point after his death, when I became involved with the Museum of Jewish Heritage, we decided that it would be a wonderful thing to start a curatorial internship, which combines many of my father's loves of education, of Jewish objects, of Jewish history and heritage at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And we founded this curatorial internship in his memory. And Esme has been our latest curatorial intern. And I'm sure that if my father were alive, he would have been thrilled to meet you and to hear your presentation. And just one word about the presentation. I was extremely touched. I had not seen this presentation before. That's for the audience. It's all new for me. I had no idea what Esme was going to speak about, just the general topic. When I saw one of the objects that you chose, those two stones from the synagogues and the Friedberger Anlage and from the Bornplatz, the Friedberger Anlage is in Frankfurt. My father lived in Frankfurt for 20 years, between 1920 and 1939, actually. And he davened, he prayed at the synagogue at the Friedberger Anlage, at the Hirsch synagogue there. And that place was home for him. And the original rabbi of that synagogue, that was his Rebbe, that Rabbi Shlomo Breuer was the rabbi that he spoke about all the time. And just one more story, someone who I worked with many years ago, 40 years ago already, at the Institute of Holocaust Studies at Bar-Ilan University, which I now head today, he and I started talking, and it turns out that his father had been with my father in Buchenwald, and he told me a story. He, unlike my father, he had not been deported, and he heard this story from friends who were in Frankfurt at the time of Kristallnacht. And they looked out the window, and there were two synagogues on the Friedberger Anlage, two Orthodox synagogues, and there had been, the story about two Jews, three synagogues, yours, mine, and the one we'll never step foot into. So that was pretty much what was going on there. And there was tremendous rivalry between the two communities. And as a young boy, he looked out the window on that night between November 9th, 10th, 1938, and he saw on the left side of the Friedberger Anlage, one synagogue was going up in flames, and on the right side of the Friedberger Anlage, the other synagogue was going up in flames. And all he could think to himself was, for years, you wouldn't even talk to each other, but for the Nazis, you can all burn together. And that was a lesson for him. In other words, stick together, because it doesn't make a difference how you define yourself and your identities. When somebody looks from the outside, they're going to lump you all together. Something about Jewish heritage, Jewish solidarity. And I think that a lot of that came through in what Esme was telling us in her excellent presentation. So thank you once again, Esme. And thank you all again for coming. I hand everything back to Treva.
Thank you so much, Judy. I'm about to start the Q&A, so if everyone can continue to add your questions in the Q&A box, we'll see how many we can get to. But I also just want to say thank you, Judy, so much for creating this program and for telling those stories about your father. I know this internship is such an incredible testament to his survival and his commitment to education and to young people. And I was so excited to hear the story about the Norbert Strauss, the stones that Norbert Strauss had saved. It's incredible that just these two stones collected by a little boy so many years ago can create all of these generative and incredible connections. And it's kind of a great example of how just one small act of memory can have this very, very, very long legacy. So thank you for that. With that, I'll jump into my first question. So this one is for Esme. So we know you're studying at Brandeis, and we're wondering if you could tell us some more about your program and kind of how your scholarly interests led you to this particular research project at the Museum of Jewish Heritage.
Okay. So my major is, we call it NEJS, Near Eastern Judaic Studies. I am in the specific track of ancient Near Eastern and biblical studies, the Bible in the ancient world. And I mainly study like the Hebrew Bible and putting it into the context of where it was written and the people who are actually reading it and writing it down, and also just the wider history of the ancient Near East, as well as how the Bible is interpreted today and has been interpreted, and how that has affected and changed our society and our world for the past 2,000 years. So I really like history, and a lot of what we deal with is looking at how did the Jews of the Bible define themselves, and did they define themselves as as a nation, as a people group, as a family, as all these different things throughout all the texts. And personally, I was also kind of questioning, as I think any young person does, my own identity and how I would want to define myself. And if you've never been to the Museum of Jewish Heritage, obviously, I am of the opinion you should go. But before we even get the core exhibition about the Holocaust, before you get into the history and the kind of horrors, you start off with a room that is, what is Judaism, kind of to frame everything. And I think that is so important to not just talk about the horrors, but also talk about what is Judaism, what was Judaism, what was lost, and what is still remaining today. And so I kind of took these ideas and the appreciation of that room and kind of took my own spin on it and my own attempt at defining what is being Jewish. What does that mean? And how has it changed, and how does it change from person to person, time period to time period?
Thank you so much. I think there's another question that kind of builds on this one. So that is about your research process for the project. How did you find the sources and the objects that you talked about, and how did you decide on which ones to focus on?
So originally I was planning on doing a timeline of different ways that Jews identify themselves throughout history. And that was not the best to showcase this collection, especially because most of our objects are from the 1940s, 1930s. So I was really struggling with finding something like from ancient times. And I was talking to Sarah Softness, who is a curator here, and she suggested that I go down into the core exhibition and I look at objects and I kind of show and not tell. And that is the way I kind of went into this. And at first, I was researching this kind of like an essay, and then I just kind of took 2 hours, went through the entire exhibition, looked at every single object, and kind of wanted and waited to see what I thought spoke to Jewish identity. And then I narrowed all of those objects down into the ones that I felt like I really highlighted these 4 different aspects that I wanted to highlight, but also had a deeper meaning to it. It wasn't just wasn't showing. I mean, it wasn't telling, it was showing, and had metaphors to them and deeper levels.
Beautiful. And now this is a really wonderful question for Judy. So what has it been like for you to watch the various curatorial interns explore the Museum of Jewish Heritage collection? Have you noticed common themes or objects in what the various interns have chosen to study?
Oh, that's a marvelous question. I think that each intern expresses their own desires of what interests them. The common denominator is that they're all Chaskel Tydor Curatorial Interns, and that they all speak about something that's meaningful to them, which is what they should be doing. I can't say that they've all chosen the same types of objects. I think maybe identity is something that is a theme that repeats itself over and over again. But everybody defines identity and shows identity, whether they're talking about Jewish identity or whether they're talking about Holocaust identity or whether they're talking about their own personal identity in a different way. that actually expresses better than anything else the multifacetedness, the wonderful variations that we've had among our curatorial interns, and this is what makes it all so fascinating.
Absolutely. Another interesting question came in, and I think both of you might be able to speak to this. So Esme talked about the history of the symbolism behind the Jewish star and dispelled some popular myths about it. Why do you think that the history of the symbol is not more well known?
All right, Esme, do you want to go first, or
I'll go first. I think it's because the Jewish star, Star of David, is seen as kind of an equivalent to the cross. And the cross is a very religious symbol and has really only represented Christians throughout history, and also has not really been a sign or doesn't have the baggage that the Star of David has. While the Star of David, mostly when you see it, is just more of a symbol of Judaism, the religion, and that is the way that it was used because people equated Jews as mainly for their religious beliefs and didn't really think of it in a different way. I also think that Zionism and them adopting the symbol and then the creation of Israel and using that as their flag has also kind of affected the way that the Star of David is seen. So a lot of different things, I think, kind of add to the confusion and uh, about the origins of the symbol.
Okay, that's an excellent answer. I want to add to that if you're talking about Jewish symbols that are supposed to vie with the cross, I think back to the archetype Jew versus Christian, which is the ecclesia and the synagogue, which are the two statues that are at the entrance of Christian cathedral in France. And the ecclesia, the church, is holding two beautiful women. One is holding a staff that at the top of the staff is actually a cross, while the synagogue, is the same. She's not ugly. She's not something. She's a beautiful woman, but her head is down. Her staff is broken. There is no Jewish star. There is no Jewish symbol, but it's obvious that this is the old religion that's broken. This is the new religion. So there was no concept of a Jewish star, of a Magen David in those times. When you were speaking about the different forms of marking Jews during the Middle Ages, so one of the most interesting markings was always that in England, while in Germany and in other countries, you had a circle in different colors, which were usually red and white and yellow. Why? So I always ask my students and they say, red is danger and yellow is cowardice, and why white? And I said, no, why are fire trucks red? Why are ambulances white? Because you see them from far away, that's all, just bright. And it's supposed to say, Jew, Jew, keep away. So in England, what do they have? In England, they had two blue and white tablets of law. That was the Jewish symbol. Not yellow, not blue and white were the Jewish colors of the and two tablets that Jews would wear on the breast of their outer coat. And that was the Jewish symbol in England in the Middle Ages until the Jews were kicked out of England in 1290, but that's a story unto itself. So Jewish symbols have changed throughout the ages. And yes, most definitely the Zionist adoption of the Magen David gave it tremendous public relations. But it existed before then. And yes, it existed long, long ago, including in the Arab world and in the pagan world, that, hey, so did the swastika. Nazis didn't make that one up either. They just switched it around and did it from right to left instead of left to right. It's supposed to be a symbol of good luck when you do it the other way around. Somebody messed up and now it's came the Nazi symbol, and boy, was that bad luck, unfortunately for the Jews too, but also for the Nazis.
Okay, with that, thank you so much to both Judy and Esme for this presentation. I'm going to hand things back to Isabel to close out the program.
Hi, everyone. I know we're at the top of the hour, so I will keep this short. I just wanted to reiterate what has been said and thank Esme, Judy, and Treva for being with us today. It was really an incredible presentation and discussion. I think everyone really learned a lot. I know I personally did. I also want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's program, we hope you'll consider making a donation to support the museum at mjhnyc.org/support and joining us for our upcoming programs, which you can find at mjhnyc.org/current events. And I will also be posting these links in the chat for everyone. You can watch past programs and view and share today's recording, which will be available later this week on our YouTube channel. So thank you all again. We hope you have a great day, and we'll see you soon.